So this week, President's also working on the tax and the one big beautiful bill, the spending cuts. That's all going on. I mean, that's like a sidebar. I mean, it's full on work going on behind the scenes. Let's talk about what's going on. The engagement with the economic war with China, full on. Want to make sure people are saying, hey, how do you de-escalate this? All kind of articles over the weekend, people saying, gosh, we didn't really realize that China had all this leverage over us on the supply chain. It's going like, where have you been living? And these are people in the know. This is not just folks out there in the hinterland who just don't get into politics. That's everything. And right now we have a full embargo. At those tariff rates the president's put on, it's a full embargo. And the question is, when is that going to start hitting and when it's going to start affecting the American economy? So people are working nonstop on that. I can tell you that there's all kind of deals. I think Scott Bessent came out with, there's a bunch of the biggest, or Charlie Gasparino, quoting somebody over Treasury that Japan's very close. I think a couple of three of these nations are very close. We're going to get all over that a little later today in the evening show. I want to bring Liz York back because of the situation. So walk our audience through, look, we have a huge audience in traditional Catholics and evangelical Christians, but for maybe people are not, why do people like you, who folks are fine, you're very even-handed in most things. You're one of the leading voices on child trafficking and making sure we take care of all the evils of child trafficking, which, I think the administration is making progress. I'm not sure it's quick enough for some folks, like the 350,000 undocumented children that are here somehow, are supposed to be here. But why do you become so uncompromising when it comes to this situation in the Catholic Church, ma'am?
Well, because speaking of unaccompanied minor children, Steve, in 2013, when Bergoglio became Pope, Pope Francis, Ted McCarrick, the Obama administration immediately began in the Northern Triangle, which is El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, bringing up unaccompanied minor children. That's why they needed Bergoglio and Pope Francis to be the one to put his blessing on it. And you may recall, Steve, in 2015, Pope Francis went to the southern border and blessed the migrants and encouraged everyone to, for humanitarian purposes, to encourage these children to come into the country. Now, they expected in 2016, 2017, Hillary Clinton to win. They did not expect Trump to be the president. And you'll also recall that Bergoglio was responsible and very, very loudly called Trump a non-Christian for wanting to build borders. And he's continued the drumbeat until his last breath about the deportation of illegal aliens into the United States. I am convinced that this color revolution was for the specific purpose, and this is why MAGA should be concerned about, the specific purpose to use the Catholic Church, not only in South America and in Central America, which they did, but also around the world. Because, Steve, what nobody's been talking about is this invasion into the United States. They've got the Catholic Church's people in Turkey and Italy, all over the world, funneling them into this network and bringing them across the border. This has been the brainchild of McCarrick and Obama and Biden and Bergoglio. And this is why we have got to get to the bottom of why this suspicious and unusual resignation, abdication of Pope Benedict. Because I want to remind our audience, the previous Pope, Pope Benedict, wanted Europe to be re-Christianized. He did not want migration into Europe. And what did they get? They got massive Islamic migration into Europe. Pope Benedict refused to sign a China agreement. He had to go. And he was absolutely adamant that the Islamic countries had to have reciprocation with Christians, because the imams went to Benedict and said, oh, we expect you to give us religious freedom. He said, I expect reciprocity with the Christians in mainly Islamic countries. They had to get rid of Benedict. The documents that I've seen, in the cables that I've seen, he had had to go, and they had to put in a modernist, pro-globalist who would put
the way the deep church works, or the Secretary of State, the Curia, which is the administrative state of the Vatican. Parolin is the Secretary of State. They run technically the operations of the Vatican. Parolin went and cut a deal with the Chinese Communist Party. The most vibrant church we have in the world, the Catholic Church and the evangelicals, are the house churches for the evangelicals in China and the underground Catholic Church. It is reported by folks I know in China that understand this, that there's up to 100 million practicing Christians, both evangelicals in these house churches, and which is like it's like ancient Rome, right? And the underground Catholic Church. Parolin and Cardinal Zen was the great hero and saint, was the one that warned us about this. Parolin, who they're touting as the guy, the Secretary of State that will take over from Bergoglio. Parolin cut a deal with the Chinese Communist Party to basically throw under the bus the underground Catholic Church and support the state Catholic Church, which is essentially like the Nazis had, or the Russians had state Orthodox Church. The Nazis had it too. These are just mouthpieces for these dictatorial regimes. Parolin cut a deal in where you won't see the laity have any voice at all, particularly the right-wing laity at all, in anything that goes on in church. They gave the Chinese Communist Party, and this was McCarrick's deal that he had worked on for years with his henchman, Parolin. They gave the Chinese Communist Party the veto rights over the bishops. This is why Cardinal Zen, who was 90-some years old, got on a plane and flew back. Remember, we covered this live a couple of years ago. He flew from Hong Kong to the Vatican to say, hey, this is dead wrong. You can't do this. They kept him waiting for 3 days. I think they gave him a 2-minute handshake at the end, right? A fare thee well. They're up to their eyes, and it's a secret deal. By the way, being the Vatican city-state and being part of the United Nations, because of what happened in World War I, you cannot have secret treaties. You can't have secret alliances. They refuse to put this forward so we can review it because they're taking cash money from the Chinese Communist Party. They're taking cash money from the Chinese Communist Party. I stood on the roof of that convent right there looking down. This is years ago when they had the big pedophile conference. Remember that? We went over to cover that. They were supposed to expose everything, which they exposed nothing. But they broke this deal at the same time to try to bury this deal. I went up and it was like a 50-mile-an-hour wind with Ben Harnwell and the team and did live reporting from it because this stinks to high heaven, and they renewed it. This is McCarrick. This is Parolin. This is why they had to get Bergoglio in there. The deep church of the Curia, Lizior, runs the deal, and they're the ones that went after Trump. He went to the border and remember he had the mass on the border and was saying Trump was terrible, and Trump, this is the whole thing the last couple of days when JD went. We're heartless, we don't believe in the migrant, we're terrible, we're awful Catholics, we're awful Christians, ma'am.
Yes, Steve, and they've renewed it 3 times. And guess what's happened now? Now the CCP has chosen the cardinal and the bishops. That's what's happened. That's how they flipped the tables on the church. And maybe that's the plan all along. But nevertheless, that's why I think MAGA and MAGA Catholics and Catholics around the world should demand, as soon as he's buried in the ground, we want to see that agreement in all 3 drafts of that agreement and have it null and void. Parolin gutted the faith in China. That's exactly what he did. And he elevated Xi Jinping as God and reduced Jesus Christ into rubble in the underground Catholic Church. So, I'm writing an article, Bergoglio's Den of Thieves, all the documents that need to be released, all the exposés that must happen. We have got to do, before there's a new pope, we have got to demand that these things are done. And if it doesn't happen, then there is no legitimacy to a conclave that has 80% of Bergoglio's henchmen voting for the next pope.
I'm naming right now. We're going to have a special correspondent there during the conclave, and that's going to be Liz Yor. I think the audience would like to have Liz Yor over there. Liz Yor, you'd put the fear of God in them. Which thing?
I'll be
what?
But we've got to see the results of this color revolution, which I believe happened in the Obama-Biden administration. And, as far as I'm
100%.
concerned, Steve, the Ukraine, the Iran, all the other color revolutions, they pale. They pale compared to having the moral voice of the world behind the globalist agenda. I mean, that's what they had for the last 12 years.
Yes.
Pope Francis putting his imprimatur on the terrible globalist agenda. So stay tuned. Man your battle stations. I'll be putting up an article today, which won't make many friends with the College of Cardinals, but it has to be said.
No, that's what I'm saying. Hey, we need a schism. Let's roll. Come on, you got to get this out. And you saw what they did inside our own deep. I'm sorry, Liz. Say what?
And by the way, Steve, the attack on and harassment and persecution of traditional Catholics in the United States is an abomination. We have not gotten to the bottom of it. And my research indicates that it's been going on much longer.
Yeah.
And we, as Americans, we've got to see these documents. We want to know the full extent of this persecution of traditional Catholics, because the deep state is very threatened of traditional Catholics and the Latin Mass.
Oh.
And we've got to find out.
The folks, my best sources in China in the CCP say Xi's greatest fear ain't the American military. It's not even the American government. His biggest fear is Christianity. His biggest fear is the evangelical Christians in the house churches and the traditional Catholics. Think Taiping Rebellion, when evangelical Christianity, or a version of it, went like a prairie fire through 19th century China, from Canton all the way to Nanjing and then to the gates of Shanghai, where the ever victorious army, they defeated them at the in massive land battles. But the Chinese imperial power, which the Xi is, has always been afraid of, and this is why they hated the missionaries come over there.
Yes.
They are petrified of evangelical Christianity and traditional Catholicism. It puts the fear of God in Xi. And that's why the Curia and the deep church sold out true Catholicism, right, in selling out the Chinese people. Lao Baixing, the humble Chinese people who have embraced traditional Catholicism or evangelical Christianity. It's an unbelievable, powerful force against the forces of darkness and atheism, and you can see it in all of its raw, forces in China today. Liz Ure, where do people go to get all your writings, ma'am?
My website is yourchildren, Y-O-R-E, children.com. I'm everywhere on social media under Elizabeth Yore. I'll be posting my articles. I've been ready for this day and really calling out the conclave to step up and start being Catholic again.
Liz Ure, you're the best.
Thanks,
Did I hear you
Steve.
say yes about us being a special correspondent over in Rome
Yes,
for the
you
conclave? Did you?
Say yes, if you promise not to wear
Boom.
white.
We got it. Liz Ure. Short break. Back in the War Room in just a moment.